and it is adopted. Congratulations.
It's described as a significant step towards setting a rulebook for artificial intelligence. European MPs pass a draft law to keep a check on risks posed by AI. The AI Act could serve as a framework for creating a global watchdog. But could it also suppress innovation? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The world is experiencing an artificial intelligence revolution that's changing the way we live and work. But the rapid growth in AI is also raising global concerns. Are our jobs under threat? Can it create disinformation? Will it amplify bias and misinformation? You and I, even governments, are grappling with such questions. Now, the European Parliament has taken the first step to address these concerns. It has passed a draft of what will be called the AI Act. The legislation would ban systems considered to pose unacceptable risks to human lives. But that could put European governments on a collision course with American tech giants who are investing billions of dollars in the technology.
I think that you have all heard and probably agree that AI is too important not to regulate, and it's too important to badly regulate. A good regulation that we all agree on as soon as possible must be a common objective. And, of course, that we need sound enforcement. We need these obligations that this law gives us to be a real thing on ground for people to be safe.
We're among the first to tackle the fast-moving and evolving technology with a concrete legislative proposal on how to address those powerful foundation models to build trust and provide transparency and oversight of these systems. The absolute minimum that we need to offer here is transparency. It must be clear that this content has not been made by a human. And we also go one step further and ask developers of these large models to be more transparent and share their information with providers and how these systems were trained and how they were developed.
Natasha Butler has been following the developments at the European Parliament. Here's her report from Strasbourg.
Well, the EU's proposed law is aimed at ensuring that AI systems are safe and ethical, and also that tech companies comply by rules and regulations, and if they don't, they would face very large fines. Now, the idea of the law is that it would categorise AI systems into different levels of risk. There would be low-risk systems that have less rules and regulations, but the higher the risk, the more rules and regulations will be in place. And then there will be a category deemed unacceptable risk AI systems, and amongst them would be facial recognition in public in real time. Now, there would be exceptions to this. For example, police could use biometric surveillance in public in real time if they are looking for a missing child, for example, but largely it would be banned. Many MEPs say that it simply doesn't fit into the EU's values. It would be an erosion of rights. But there are some who say that it has its place in terms of security and policing. Nevertheless, there are so many challenges with AI because it's such a fast developing system. And what policymakers have really seen is how do you balance protecting people's rights with trying to also support and balance innovation, because what they don't want is for big EU AI companies to abandon the European Union and go, for example, to the United States, and then the EU would be left behind in this tech AI race. Natasha Butler for Inside Story, Strasbourg.
All right, for more on all this, I'm joined by our guests. In Chicago is Atoosa Kasirzadeh, Director of Research at the Center for Technomoral Futures at the University of Edinburgh. She's also Senior Policy Fellow on Social and Policy Implications of Generative AI for UK Research and Innovation. In New York is Mark Simpson, tech entrepreneur and CEO of Pillar, an interview intelligence platform using AI technology. And also in Chicago is David Krueger, Professor of Machine Learning at the University of Cambridge. His work focuses on existential safety in AI learning. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Atoosa, let me start with you today. This draft law that has been passed by European MPs, how significant a step is this towards setting a rule book for artificial intelligence going forward?
I think it's a significant first step for sure, but a very difficult and long way ahead of us. I am really happy to see how Europe, especially with working on this act, is really trying to talk and think very carefully and responsibly about the regulations of AI in the world. And so I think this is definitely a significant act because it also shows to the other continents and other countries in the world that we are able to do something. And so this is the first step. Let's continue the work together.
David, the last time I spoke with you earlier this month, you, along with tech leaders and scientists, had issued a warning about the perils posed by artificial intelligence. Does this draft law that has passed make you feel that the warnings that you and others have issued about AI are now being taken more seriously?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I'm also happy to see this legislation being passed. But it's been in the works for a long time, since long before we made that statement, and it's certainly not geared specifically at existential risk. I think it's more geared at the kind of problems we were already seeing, 5 years ago when people started drafting the law. On the other hand, there has been, a lot of other signs that people are starting to think more about existential risk. So I am encouraged by recent developments, but not this one in particular.
Oh, David, if I could follow up with you, what are some of the other signs that you're seeing that make you believe that others are now factoring in the so-called existential threats?
I think I was just talking to a lot of people, including, on media like this, but I guess also the UK government has made public statements about this. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly their plans are, or that that they're doing all of the right things there, but at least they're, saying that they are taking it seriously and trying to convene leaders, at least with the U.S., to talk about this. I think it's still maybe missing the full international scope that we need to really handle this effectively. We need to include other countries like China as well, but it might be a step in the right direction. Maybe too soon to say, though.
Mark, so if governments are now racing to regulate AI, what are some of the concrete steps that can be taken from your perspective that would make sure that creativity and that innovation aren't stifled?
Yeah, we welcome this new policy from the EU, and I think it just has to be applied in the right way. And the right way for innovation and the right way for creativity is just making sure that there is regulation around some of the cores and some of the bad actors that happen out there. I mean, there are still many laws in place that you cannot use any kind of technology, whether it's AI or anything else, for bad acting. And if we follow the laws that are currently in place right now and apply those in a way in which is relevant to AI and with the same ethos, I think this could be a very encouraging step forward.
Atoosa, AI, of course, has also become a focus of concern when it comes to the potential to create misinformation, also when it comes to deepfake technology. These are AI-generated images and videos that mimic people. How worried, from your perspective, should we be about this at this particular time?
Yeah, I think we should definitely be very worried, especially with the advancements in the developments of generative models that we are seeing. We are going to get better and better synthetic media that is produced, basically the content like images or text or videos or audio voices that are generated by these technologies. And sometimes it is very hard for humans to kind of like judge whether the content that they are seeing on social media, other platforms, is generated by an AI system or is generated by like a credible, or it's coming from a credible source. And I think when we get to a situation where at a social scale, we feel paralyzed in judging and distinguishing between the kind of content that is coming from credible sources and the kind of content that is generated by an AI system, I think then we basically are at the verge of a very kind of existential crisis, if I can call that, right? Because then basically the very threats of democratic institutions, what does it mean to trust each other? What does it mean to trust different governments and different kind of institutions in any country, also globally, kind of would be loosened. And I don't have a positive vision of the life after that kind of stage.
David, I saw you nodding along to some of what Atoosa was saying there, and certainly she used the verbiage of saying that this is existential. That's a word that you and your colleagues have used when talking about the threat posed by AI. How much concern do you have that AI is developing faster than it can be controlled? And also, did you want to jump in and add to what Atoosa was saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a lot of concern about that. I mean, that's why we created that statement. So I think, yeah, definitely that's my number one concern is that, you know, in general, we're just scratching the surface of how extreme things could get with AI, both in terms of just the raw intelligence or power of the systems, but also the social impact that that'll lead to. So I think, you know, misinformation is definitely one issue that I think is important and that could have the kind of catastrophic consequences that Atoosa mentioned, and I think could play a role in future existential risk scenarios. I think it's interesting that we haven't seen it happen, like have an even larger impact already with the techniques that are out there, but I think we could be about to cross a threshold where it starts to really have some really huge impact on our information ecosystem. So I think about, you know, the 2024 election in the US, because I'm American. I think there's also been growing reports of people using these systems for fraud, which is another risk that is, you know, related to this fake news and the ability to, you know, synthesize voice and imitate people's voice and things like this. And I believe that also similar to tactics that Russia or operatives in Russia have used in the past 2020 election, they're similarly trying to sort of sow discord using more advanced generative AI techniques on social media platforms already. This is something I heard about recently. Generally speaking, I think this issue of like sort of degrading trust is a really huge one. Like, I think it will probably push people to like sort of by necessity put more trust in large institutions like governments or the largest media companies, which, you know, has a number of consequences, right? So right now, I think we don't have to do that because we can still sort of verify for ourselves when we see some content, you know, that thing really happened. It seems like, but in the future, we might still be able to maintain that kind of verifiability for a while using technical tools, but those tools will not be things that are widely understood. So you'll have to defer to authority about whether or not to trust, you know, that this content is legitimate more and more over time.
Right, right. Mark, the rapid growth in AI is raising global concerns when it comes to many different issues. I want to ask you, as a tech entrepreneur, when people ask you if, due to AI, that jobs are now more under threat than before, what is your response?
I mean, as with any monumental sort of shift in the market, which I do see AI as part of that, same as the Industrial Revolution and other shifts historically, yes, there will be certain jobs that are a threat in the market, but I see it more as a job shift and a skills shift in the market rather than we're all going to lose all of our jobs. There's the opposing view as well that with AI alongside us to help us do our jobs and to help us add more value into society, there is a potential boom around the corner in the market that we are doing higher value jobs and getting paid more for it as well. So I do believe there's going to be a shift and a significant shift in the skills that are needed. But I believe that actually AI can help us if we look forward into the world in years and decades to come.
Well, concern is also being expressed by the United Nations Secretary General, who has backed calls for a global watchdog to ensure that artificial intelligence technology is safe, secure, responsible, and ethical.
Alarm bells over the latest form of artificial intelligence, generative AI, are deafening. And they are loudest from the developers who designed it. The scientists and experts have called on the world to act, declaring AI an existential threat to humanity on a par with the risk of nuclear war. We must take those warnings seriously.
Atoosa, the UN Secretary General has also backed a proposal for the creation of an international watchdog to monitor AI. From your vantage point, how long might that take to become a reality?
So I just want to say that this whole process is going to be absolutely complicated, and basically many kind of organizations like UN need to listen to the voices of lots of different experts. Just saying that we are going to have a watchdog to monitor AI does not mean too much, because AI can mean anything. Basically, in simple terms, any kind of algorithmic system that can do some kind of reasoning is an AI system. So what does it mean to say we want to monitor AI? Then there is this very complicated task of interpreting this notion. I think the very statement that we need to kind of like think about the conception of a watchdog to monitor AI, it's great. But when we compare, for example, this proposal with the proposal with the watchdog for monitoring the development of kind of nuclear energy, we see there are so many different differences between these two proposals. They're both watchdogs, proposal for watchdogs to monitor a kind of a system. But for the case of like basically the monitoring of the nuclear energy, we can distinguish, or we can basically inhibit the use of nuclear energy, or nuclear energy, nuclear technologies for military purposes. That makes sense. But if we say, okay, let's kind of like inhibit the use of AI system for military purposes, that just does not make sense, because I think most of the countries in the world are using one or many other versions of AI in their military development. So we need to be very careful when it comes to the interpretation of these terms. And I think this is going to be a very complicated process. And the best we can do is just to bring in different voices, different stakeholders together, and do like very complicated brainstormings. Otherwise, these statements are going to just be like statements that make no sense. And when we want to really put them down into operation, then we see like we can't really do much.
Mark, I saw you reacting to a lot of what Atoosa was saying there. So please go ahead if you want to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Atoosa. I certainly agree with a lot of what you said there. It's very easy to monitor building a nuclear weapon where the products that go into that are very, very hard to come by. It's very, very easy to build an algorithm and to build AI. So a watchdog is a great headline. It's the implementation of that watchdog is going to be hard. It's going to be very, very complicated, and we certainly need to hear more about the thoughts around how this is going to be monitored, and from what directions for it actually to be useful.
David, let me get your thoughts on this. I mean, do you think that it's realistic that a watchdog can be created, and can it be created in the kind of a timeline in order to actually be effective? Because AI, of course, is developing very, very rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about that kind of question these days is not like can it, but must it? And I think the answer to that is yes. We need all of these things to happen like as soon as possible. So I don't know much about how things work at the UN actually yet. So I don't know how long it's normally you would expect something like this to take. But yeah, I think just to respond to this question of like what to monitor and how it makes sense. I mean, I agree that this is something that we should there should be a lot of discussion about. But I think it's actually pretty easy right now to monitor at least the largest AI models, and those are actually very difficult to create, and only a few organizations have the capacity to. I mean, arguably, only OpenAI right now has the capacity to build a model like GPT-4. And so I think if what we're most concerned about is the largest, frontier models, then it could be pretty easy to start monitoring models like that basically any time. If we just have the political will to do it, you can monitor the large compute that is needed to build them, and you can monitor the production and distribution of that compute. So we're talking about, tens or possibly even hundreds of millions of dollars worth of computer chips that are, specialized high-end chips that all need to be co-located in the same facility. Now, over time, that might change as we get, cheaper, faster chips and better technologies. So that might make monitoring more difficult over time, but I think we can start right now. Yeah, so I think in that sense, it is actually more similar to nuclear weapons if you care most about just the biggest models, which are the ones that I think are most likely to pose extinction risk in the near term, because they're the ones that have the most intelligence and are potentially poised to become intelligent enough to get out of control.
Atoosa, aside from the draft law that was passed, you also have the U.S. and the European Union drawing up a voluntary code of conduct for artificial intelligence. But as far as I understand, for this to be effective, it would need the tech industry to basically sign up as well. And what I'm curious about is if you believe that for the tech industry to be involved? Can they be trusted to be putting up safeguards for themselves, to be trying to regulate themselves?
So I think we need to definitely have different forms of regulation, like some kind of self-regulation obviously is needed. And I think many like research labs and many AI companies already have some versions of self-regulation, like they have some kind of like safety and ethics team or safety and transparency team or policy team. So they have the research labs have some kind of like researchers and experts that are trying to somehow self-regulate. So we have, I think, a minimal level of self-regulation within the companies, but that's just not enough because these systems can really disrupt human society at a global scale. And so we definitely need to kind of bring the conversation to a more serious and more advanced stage where we kind of go and ask the tech CEOs, for example, what do you mean exactly by self-regulation? So when Sam Altman, as one example, talks about regulation and comes and says this is really important, the next stage is that he needs to come and say, what does he exactly mean with self-regulation? Or regulation in general, what he does not mean. Otherwise, we are going to just pass the words together and talk about things, and then the development of AI is going forward. And unfortunately, I think we would fail in properly regulating. So we need to get much more concrete, bringing different stakeholders to the table, bringing people who have done lots of work on responsible and ethical and safe AI for many years, bringing those experts and views on the table and the views of the CEOs of tech companies on the table and put them into like dynamic and fruitful conversation. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to end up somewhere good.
David, I can see that you wanted to jump in a lot there, so please go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything Atoosa said. Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I mean, I think short answer is like, no, we absolutely cannot trust tech companies to regulate themselves. I mean, I think that's just, on the face of it, kind of absurd at the point that we're at when even the CEOs of these companies are saying we need regulation, and they're not just talking about self-regulation. Now, I think, yeah, there are good people, I think, working on some of the policy and ethics teams at some of these companies, and they have some good ideas. So we should listen to them and bring them into the conversation. But like Atoosa said, we can't leave it up to them. I think, the dynamics here is that there are just very powerful incentives to build more powerful AI systems. And at some point, we may need to stop building more powerful AI systems. And if your business as a company is founded on building more and more powerful AI systems, then that's going to be a significant threat to your business. And that means that I don't think in a competitive, profit-driven marketplace, companies are going to take that kind of action when it's necessary. So we really need regulation that is able to step in and say what you're doing is not safe, it's not trustworthy, it's unacceptable to develop or deploy this kind of system, and even if that's going to really hurt your bottom line, you just can't do it. Whereas a lot of the sort of self-regulation and regulation that we've seen so far is like, well, you can do it, but you have to like do it this way or do a little bit of extra stuff, on top. And it's not really drawing these hard lines in the sand that say, at this point, you are not allowed to develop or deploy this kind of system anymore. But that's where we need to go, in my mind.
Mark, whenever one talks about regulation, concerns are raised about the possibility of over-regulation. I want to ask you about that specifically. If it's perceived that there is over-regulation on the part of the EU with this AI Act, would you essentially start seeing some big tech firms deciding to leave the EU and essentially go and set up shop in a country with less regulations, or possibly even the US? I mean, is that one of the concerns for the EU right now in all of this?
It's certainly a concern, yes. And I just want to pick up on one thing that I disagree with David there, and that if regulation turned to limiting the use of AI or limiting the development of AI, we would lose a global sort of competitive advantage. I think focus for regulation should be around the fundamentals, around legal, around ethical, around safety standards, and those issues. And as long as we're working in collaboration in the right way, then I think it's a very, very encouraging step forward. I do think that limiting our ability and our computability would just put us at a disadvantage from other nations and from other areas of the world. And that would be a very, very worrying situation to be in. In terms of, for me, and the way in which I look at regulation, we are helping thousands of companies to work more ethically as it stands, and there is a lot of self-regulation in tech right now that we would not have customers if we did anything unethical, we did anything illegal. So the self-regulation that we've had for years will still remain. I welcome governments getting involved and putting a little bit more solidity behind that work.
Atoosa, we don't have a lot of time left, but we've spoken a lot about the complexities around this issue, the complexities in trying to build a framework for regulation, for legislation. I want to ask you, I mean, how do you go about trying to strike a balance between progress and threat?
That's a very good question. And I just want to say, I don't think there is, you should not expect me or anyone else to give you like a simple answer to this question. But I want to kind of like say one thing that I imagine is really important. And that is that I hope the governments do not just listen to the way CEOs of big companies talk about regulation, and then they don't want to kind of build up their ideas around how the CEOs want regulations to work. You know, there's this like unfortunate narrative that some people in different governments do not understand technology, and the CEOs and people who are coming from big companies understand technology. I don't think the space is this binary. There are people like me, there are people like David, there are so many other people in this space, so many people like over the years who have done loads of work on ethical AI, responsible AI, and these communities of people who know about technology to a certain degree and know about regulation and policy and historical social complexities about that, they need to bring a very like loud voice into this space. Unfortunately, that's not what's happening in the US. That's not what's happening in the UK. And I really hope that changes. And I think if that changes, then we are going to have more productive and hopefully optimistic kind of conversations about how to go and resolve this super complicated trade-off problem, as you correctly mentioned.
All right. Well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the discussion there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Atoosa Kasirzadeh, Mark Simpson, and David Krueger. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.